Okay. Is there some message out here? As discussed, we have updated the session link. For now, you can take the session on the. For now, you can take the session on the old link. Okay, they have updated, but they did not inform, which is great. Let me go ahead. Give me 1 second. Uh, class recording link, class Zoom link. That's the one. Okay, cool. Done. Okay, so I guess in the last two sessions, you guys learned about the different types of HTTP methods, right? And how to implement them in Spring Boot. One of you can confirm.
Yes, sir.
Okay, cool. Did you guys also go through the patch method?
No, sir.
Okay, all right. I'll teach the patch, and so basically, I'll be creating a very simple application. Let's see. Task. Okay. What is it? It's going to be a message store. Okay. It'll be a language based message. Let's call it message service. Okay. And basically what we'll do is we'll create a full-fledged API, a set of APIs for creating messages based on the country, like for which country this message is for. And yeah, and we'll retrieve it using some headers, and we'll also use the patch method there and some query parameters. Okay, so what is the scope of this task? Okay, it'll have a messages path. Okay, where you'll create message, update message, read message, and delete message. Simple thing, nothing fancy about that. Message update will be mostly partial because you have already learned about the, or we can do complete also. Okay, and the message structure is going to look like this, where you will be sending the lang code, this lang code. Okay, and it could be en and whatever translations are available, and then just the message. Okay, and if we really want, we could have a type of message. Okay, uh, it'll be your message, and then there will be something called type. Okay, it could be of welcome, not welcome, greet, uh, goodbye, general. Okay, these three categories of message. So it will be a language-based message service. So let's see how how we are going to implement these things. Okay, and I'm going to teach you like everything all the way from the service layer, basically because we have not learned about repository. Uh, we'll build something instead of a repository which will act like a repository. But yeah, this will mostly be the controller and service layer stuff. Okay, this is what we're going to do. And here you can fetch a particular message by this. Like this will be for all messages. Okay, I'm just gonna write down the APIs. Specific message, and then let's say you want a particular type of you want all the messages of a particular type, so this will be one of the APIs. Then let's say you want messages of a particular language code. Okay, so that will be one. And let's say you want both, so basically, okay, now there is one more thing here, which is basically how do you handle multiple query parameters. This is a very real use case. We'll see how things are done. So what we're going to do is, let me add a few more things, like message service will have messages, type of messages, English language. What else can it have? Let's say we also tell what region it is for. Okay, region, like what region you're going to use for Southeast Asia. Okay, it's called Southeast Asia, SEAC. Okay, something like this, or US North, something like this. Okay, which message is required for which region, and what else is there? How can we make this query long? What can we add here? Message service, which will give you messages, type, region. I guess this is all for now. Okay. Yep. Do we have to add any more thing? Let me think. You can fetch a message by type. You can fetch a message by region. You can fetch a message by language. Come on, guys. Any idea as to how else a message can be fetched? Let's go for this one. If I come up with something, we'll go with this. And what I'm going to do is I'll say messages, okay, and basically by all three of them, type and end line code and end, okay, region. Okay, so what am I building here? I'm going to build a message service, okay, where you can create a message and you can generate a message. I mean, you can fetch the messages that you have created. It is going to be language based, as in it is going to support a few languages, the same message in few languages, and it will basically perform these functions on. I'm just going to build a single resource. This is resource and these are all the APIs. So we are going to work with a single resource, which is messages, and we're going to allow these APIs to exist. We're going to allow these functionalities to exist, okay? And the structure is going to look something like this. All right, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. What do I call this thing? Let me go to Spring Initializer. Okay. All right. In.geekster. Okay. And Spring tutorial. This would be a message service. Okay. Demo project for Spring Boot. Nope. Message service for Geekster. Okay. Yep, that's it. 8 is the version I'm following here. Let me quickly check. Ooh. Yeah. Cool. What are the dependencies I'm going to add? Let's see. Lombok for sure. Spring Web. Do we need anything else here? Jersey, Apache, Timeleaf, nothing else. Okay, that should be it. Okay, no database connection whatsoever. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to generate this. Okay. I need to check if they pushed any code. So what I'll do is I'll go to workspace. Oh, okay. I have files here. Great. This is part of Spring. Which module is this? One second. Never mind. We'll just create this Spring module later. Okay. So just move this. Where's the project here? Message service. Bring it over here. Okay. Unzip message service. Done. Remove message service dot zip. So I'm only left with this. Okay. Done. Open this up. Okay, this was of the old application, so we'll get rid of that. We'll open this message service. and let this load for some time. Maven project. Cool, done. Okay, so this is how I'm going to work essentially. Okay, so you know, you guys have been taught about the service layer, right? Anyone? Let me actually check the curriculum, okay? Rather than asking you these things. Educators. So what is the this is our session. Fundamentals. Teaching assistant. Where is the? Give me 1 second. Class programs. Yep. December, March. March web fundamentals. This is the one. Okay, let's see. What have we learned till now? We have learned about. We have learned just about the controllers. Okay, service layer has not been started yet, so we'll just learn about the services later on. So till now, it's just at the controller layer. Okay, fine. Cool. I'll just leave it open. Okay. Okay, so basically I'll just create the, so how we do this thing is, we'll start from the bottommost layer. What is the first building block here? It is this request object, request class that we have to create, okay? So I'm not sure if you know this or not, but basically I'll just give you a walkthrough on this. This is what is followed in the industry. Not every company follows it, but this is one of the good practices, okay? Let me show you what I mean. At the most basic level, any Spring server or any Spring application, okay? If you consider this as your Spring Boot application, okay, if you consider this as a Spring Boot application, right? Any Spring Boot application at the bare minimum will have at least these two layers, okay? First layer will be the controller layer, okay? This is going to be the first layer. This is which will map the URL to a particular this thing. Let me actually put a color on this. Let's say this is your controller layer, okay? Now, similarly, you will have something called a service layer, which we will get introduced to later. Service, okay? We'll get introduced to this thing in the later tutorials, okay? Let's just mark this as green, okay? Then if your database is, if your application is dependent on database, then you have a DB layer, okay? Database layer. This is where your DAO, data access object, lives, okay? Okay. At the bare minimum, these are the applications. I mean, these are the three layers in which happens. Now, ideally, the most naive or the stupidest way to work with all of these three services is you create a single class, let's say, okay, let's give it this, a simple DTO class, data transfer object class. You receive the request in this, then pass it on to service layer, then pass it on to database layer, okay? This will work fine for very simple applications. But as your application grows, let's say your database, this is a very bad design though. I'll tell you why this is a bad design. So you can just create one model, you receive your request in the controller layer with that model, you pass that model onto your service layer, and then you pass that model onto your database layer, and you can pass it back and forth like this, okay? Problem with this is, all three layers are going to be strictly dependent on this particular blue ball that we have here, which is the only single model that is going to be passing through these three layers, okay? So suppose tomorrow you want to change your API. Let's say you add one more field to your request class. Okay, this object will then change, which means the service layer will also have to accommodate that change, and the database layer will also have to accommodate that change. Okay, now let's say you have added a field called some field which the only the controller needs, service layer doesn't need. So it'll be an extra piece of information that service won't be needing. At the database layer, it will be an additional column that database really doesn't need. Okay, so what is generally practiced is maintain 3 separate layers. Okay, for all of these 3. Okay, how do I say this? What I basically mean by this is let the controller layer use something that only controller understands. Let the service layer use only something that service layer understands, and let the database layer handle only what it understands. Okay, so basically this is, each layer is responsible for its own, for modeling its data. Okay, controller layer will be responsible for modeling the request, service layer will be responsible for modeling its own data, database layer will be responsible for modeling its own data. Okay, this is the general practice that we usually follow. So what happens now is, if this guy needs to pass this information to this guy, there is usually a conversion logic implemented here. Okay, I'll just leave it as blank. This conversion. Okay, if this is confusing to you, let me know, I'll help you understand. So basically what happens, this data that we capture at the controller layer goes through a conversion to become something that the service layer understands. Similarly, when the service layer talks to the database layer, it basically makes this model go through this conversion, which then turns it into something that database layer understands. So if we like, you can name it whatever ways you want, but we are going to follow 3 mechanisms here. Okay, first thing is Dtos. Okay, we're going to call this the Dtos. Actually, let me just put them here. We're going to call them the models. Okay, this will be entities. Okay, let me know if you have any issues understanding what I just did. I'll explain again before I move on next. Abhishek, Ankit, you guys all understood?
Sir, explain again once time.
Yes. Okay. See, any
Sir,
Spring application.
dispatcher servlet, no, sir.
Dispatcher servlet comes before the controller layer, but that's like, we'll get there later. Okay, for now, because we're just like still at the beginning of Spring Boot, let's just assume that you have these 3 layers. At any given point, you have the controller layer, the service layer, and database layer. Before this, you have many other things. You have dispatcher servlet. Before that, you have Spring filters. Before that, you have a ton of other things. Don't worry about that right now. Just these are the 3 major components. Okay, anything goes wrong, it can go wrong in only these 3 layers, because these 3 layers are what we as Spring Boot developers implement. Okay, so any Spring application at the bare most level will be having a controller. Controller will be taking the request. Like, for example, I have my messages here, right? This particular URL will be mapped to a certain method. Remember how I was telling you, if you hit facebook.com, it basically goes and triggers a method at the backend, right? That mapping between the URL and the method is done by the controller. Okay, then the business logic, it never actually sits on the controller layer. It always sits on the service layer. So now the service layer is a layer which will handle the business wala part. Okay, controller is essentially just going to be like, controller's job is to sanitize the data, as in to check if the request body is valid or not, to catch the exceptions at the highest level and decide how to send a response, and if there are multiple calls, let's say the call to messages will be calling service A, then service B, then service C. The controller can orchestrate that. The controller can direct what to call after this. These are usually at the controller layer, these are the three jobs that a controller has: verify and validate the data, and then decide who to call when. That's basically what the controller does. It never deals with the business logic. The business logic always sits in the service layer, and your data persistence layer, where your data is actually saved, sits in the database layer. Okay. Now, if you had a single object, let's say this is the single model which goes here. Let's say you're using, let's actually start typing. Okay. Java. I'm going to create a package called models. Okay. And I'm going to create a particular class here called messages, or just message. Okay, that's it. Don't ask again. Okay, what are the fields I have here? The fields I have is lang code, which is private. Okay, we're going to create an enum for this. So we'll create one more package. We'll call enums. Okay, I hope you guys know what enums are in Java. Okay, we'll call it language code. Okay, for now we'll support en, fr, I don't know, like, I don't know, this is it, like this will be enough for demonstrating. So we'll create this thing called language code. Then the next thing that we have is messages, which is basically string message. Then we have type, which is again going to be an enum. So we'll create a Java enum here. We'll call it message type. Okay. Message type would be greet, goodbye, okay, and general. Okay, these are the three messages. And then we have regions. Regions cannot be enum. I'll just leave the regions as this thing. So I'll just say private. Okay. Message type. Okay. Message type and private string region. Okay. Now, this is a particular Java class which is going to accept a request. So any request that has this particular body, okay, will be captured by this class. This much is understood, right? I'm just mapping them here. Now, if I use this particular thing for all the layers, okay, don't worry about the layers at this point because we are just learning the controller layer. The point I'm trying to make here is if I toss around this layer to all the services, tomorrow if Dto controller says I need one more variable, which basically tells me who created this thing. Let's say created by, okay. If something like this happens, what this basically does is it forces the service layer and database layer to use it, because this particular field variable will be there even though these two layers don't really need it. Okay, so this is a problem. What if we create something like this? Okay, let's change this package name to, instead of model, let's call it Dtos. Okay, and let's, acha, did it actually create what, one second, let's move it to Dtos refactor. Let's call it refactor, let's call it message Dto. Okay, yeah, select all. Okay, okay, message Dto. And then in the model here we can have a message, okay, which will have the same things. So let's say your requirement is that you need to know who created this thing. So I'll say created by, okay. Let's say this is the requirement for this. Now, this, if models is what service layer uses, because that's what I've said here, that service layer will be using the things called model. Okay. This guy does not need to have this. Okay, did you see what I just did here? Request layer needs an additional field called created by, which is the controller layer that needs an additional field created by. So I added it here. Earlier, what was happening is if I use the same object, message DTO, by all of these two other layers, they would be forced to ignore it. Okay, as in they would have a variable sitting in their class which they won't be needing, right? So if I separate it out, if I create a simple class just for the controller layer and then something else just for the service layer, then no matter how many changes you do here, it will not affect this. That is why it will also not affect the service layer. Is this point understood? The reason for separation, Ankit?
No, sir. Can you explain again, sir?
Acha. See, let's forget about the DTOs. Okay, let's say that there is nothing as DTO. Okay, you have a okay, answer me this thing. Do you know how to map such a request body to Java, to Spring Boot? That's a question, Abhishek or Ankit. Okay, if you don't know, that's fine. If you send a request like this, okay, you would have to write a Java class for that. Okay, because when your request comes, it will come like this. In order for you to access each of these variables, okay, you would have to create a Java class with the names of those variables. Okay, so this is your Java class or DTO class. DTO stands for data transfer object. Okay, this is your DTO class basically to capture your request. If I send you this request, how will you capture it, right? You don't have anything to capture it. In Java, Java only understands objects. Okay, you could have used something like a map. Okay, for example, you could have used, let's say, you could have used a map where you would have said string and object. Okay, you could have used a map for mapping these things, but then the problem is if you have a nested field like this, you would not be able to capture this thing. Okay, I mean, you would still be able to capture, but then that will be messy. So which is why what we do is, if this is how our request body looks, we are always going to create a class that will be modeled after this request. Okay, this is the model of that request. So we will have a class which basically is modeled after this request. That's why you have language code, messages, message type, and region. Is this understood what I have done here? I'm going to capture this request, so I have added these three fields. Let's say I don't want to capture the region one here. I'll just simply remove this region part, and I will just be able to capture type, message, and line code. Okay, understood so far what I've done here?
Yes, sir.
Cool. Okay, then the question is, let's say you don't have any of these things. Okay, imagine this as the message class. Okay, the controller receives the message class, and basically it needs to save the message. So it sends, because saving the message is the business logic. Controller will not do it. Okay, controller will just validate the data. It will check, is this lang code en, is this message a string or something else, is this type greet goodbye. It will just validate the data. Okay, once it has validated the data and everything, it will move this, it will basically pass it to the service layer. Okay, the service layer takes it and then it passes on to the database layer saying, hey, save this message in the database. Okay, database layer will figure out whether it's a MySQL database or NoSQL database, I mean MongoDB or something, and then it will save it there. Okay, the problem happens when, let's say your controller layer says, I need to know, let's say the controller layer says I need one more additional fields or three more additional fields. Let's say the controller says three things. I need to know the time at which this request is coming. I need to know who is creating the request. So what you will do is, in order, so let's say your request will come something like this. Okay, your request will be like creation time. Okay, let's say something, and then you will have something like created by. Okay, this. Okay, these two additional pieces of information is what the controller is going to use. Okay, but as you see, you're using the same message class, right? You're using the same message class across this and this. Now to capture these two fields, you will have to basically add two more fields here. You will say private local date time to capture the creation on time, and to capture who created it, you will say created by. Okay, these two additional fields will capture these two additional information, right? But let's say your service layer doesn't really need to know that. Your service layer doesn't care about who created it or who at what time it was created. Or let's say the database layer, you already have a schema with just these 4 columns. Okay, and now the request comes with these 2 more columns, right? That's a problem, right? Because the database layer doesn't really need these 2 fields. So for the database layer, these 2 fields will be extra information that database layer does not need. These 2 fields will be extra layer for, extra information for service layer that the service will not be using. Okay, do you understand the problem of this using a single class? Abhishek or Ankit? Hello.
Yes,
सर
sir. I got it.
शॉर्टली में एक बार और एक बार बता देना शॉर्टली में.
शॉर्टली में देखो, अगर तुम्हारा रिक्वेस्ट में मान लो ऐसा आ रहा है, ऐसा कुछ आ रहा है, ठीक है, जहां पे तुमको ये 4 चीजें कैप्चर करना है, तो तुम बेसिकली क्या करोगे, तुम एक जावा क्लास बनाओगे जिसमें तुम ये सारे मतलब जो तुम फील्ड्स कैप्चर करना चाहते हो अपना स्प्रिंग बूट सिस्टम में, उसके बेसिस पे तुम एक ऐसा क्लास बनाओगे, ठीक है, उससे तुम्हारा ये सारे कैप्चर होगा, ठीक है। अब मान लो तुम्हारा कंडीशन ऐसा है कि कंट्रोलर उसको लेगा, फिर वो सर्विस को देगा, सर्विस उसको लेगा, फिर वो डेटाबेस को देगा, ठीक है, हो गया काम खत्म। अब मान लो रिक्वायरमेंट आया ऐसे कि 2 और फील्ड चाहिए हम लोग को, ठीक है, क्रिएशन टाइम एंड क्रिएटेड बाय। ये 2 फील्ड कौन कंज्यूम करेगा, ये दो फील्ड को लेके कौन वैलिडेट करेगा, वो है तुम्हारा कंट्रोलर लेयर, ठीक है। तो तुमने यहाँ पे ऐड कर दिया वो 2 फील्ड, इसका मतलब यह है कि तुमको इस क्लास में आकर भी वो 2 फील्ड ऐड करना पड़ेगा, ठीक है। तो तुम्हारा जो ये एक्स्ट्रा 2 फील्ड है वो यहाँ पे कैप्चर हो जाएगा। अब तुम क्या कर रहे हो, अब तुम कंट्रोलर को ये रिक्वेस्ट दे रहे हो, कंट्रोलर वो रिक्वेस्ट को लेके ये 2 पर्टिकुलर इंफॉर्मेशन यूज करके वो मान लो कोई रैंडम वैलिडेशन कर रहे हैं, ठीक है। लेकिन जब वो ये सेम चीज सर्विस लेयर को दे रहा है, मान लो सर्विस लेयर को इमेजिन करो कि एक क्लास है सम डॉट सर्विस बोल के जो मैसेज क्लास कंज्यूम करते हैं, ठीक है। सर्विस लेयर को बस ये 4 इंफॉर्मेशन चाहिए, ठीक है। तो तुम जब सर्विस लेयर को ये क्लास पास कर रहे हो ना, वो उसमें से बस ये 3 इंफॉर्मेशन एक्सट्रैक्ट कर लेंगे। एक्चुअली ये 3 कैसे हो गया, यहाँ पे और एक था, प्राइवेट स्ट्रिंग रीजन, ठीक है। कंट्रोलर को ये 2 फील्ड चाहिए, बट सर्विस को बस ये 4 फील्ड चाहिए, ठीक है। तो सर्विस लेयर के लिए ये 2 फील्ड एक्स्ट्रा हो गया जो सर्विस लेयर एक्चुअली यूज नहीं कर रहे, ठीक है। सिमिलरली अगर तुम डेटाबेस में ये मॉडल पास कर रहे हो, डेटाबेस में मान लो तुम्हारे पास ऐसे 4 कॉलम ऑलरेडी बन चुका है, ठीक है, लैंग कोड, मैसेज, टाइप एंड रीजन, ठीक है। तुम्हारे पास ये एक्स्ट्रा 2 ये है जिसके लिए तुम्हारे पास कोई कॉलम नहीं है टेबल में, ठीक है। तो बेसिकली क्या हो गया, फिर तुम्हारे लिए वो एक्स्ट्रा इंफॉर्मेशन हो गया डेटाबेस लेयर के लिए जो यूज नहीं हो रहा है। यहां तक समझ में आया?
यस सर, यस सर।
ठीक है, तो टू डील विद दैट हम लोग क्या करेंगे, हम लोग हर लेयर के लिए एक अलग अलग ऑब्जेक्ट्स बनाएंगे। लेट्स जस्ट कॉल इट रैपिंग ऑब्जेक्ट, ओके, रिक्वेस्ट रैपर और समथिंग लाइक दिस, ठीक है। What will happen then is, let's say that I now create a DTO and I say that DTO is the only class which the controller will use, okay. So I'll go ahead and I'll basically add those 2 things here. Local date time, creation time, ठीक है। ये वाला 2 फील्ड मैंने DTO पे बना दिया, which means only the controller layer will use. अब मान लो मैसेज लेयर मतलब जो मॉडल है वो बस सर्विस से यूज कर रहे हैं, तो मैं वहां से ये 2 हटा दिया। मतलब क्या होगा कि जब ये DTO कन्वर्ट होके मैसेज में आएगा, तुमको बस उतना ही इंफॉर्मेशन मिलेगा जो तुम्हारे सर्विस लेयर को चाहिए। यहाँ पे even though ये extra information है, even though this extra information is there in the DTO layer or the controller layer, your service layer, which is consuming message, will only have these 4 pieces. It will only have what it needs. Understood?
Yes, sir.
Cool. So what we'll do is from now on, every time we deal with a layer, every time we learn about a layer, we'll also learn about the data wrapper. Okay. For this, we're using DTOs. For this, we're using models. For this, we're using entities. In many companies, you will see it swapped. Models will be used by controller. DTOs will be used by services, or in sometimes the models used here are going to be directly passed on to the service layer, but at the end database layer it will be a different set of entities. Okay, but the good practice is each layer has its own wrapper. Each layer, controller layer has its DTOs, service layer has its models, database layer has its entities. Okay, we are just going to deal with this part of it for today's class. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll get rid of this. Okay, and I'll just create these 2 things. Okay, for now, what is required, what is needed from me is the language code, messages, message type, and region, because these were the original constraints that I had. Okay, so I created an class for it, message DTO, which will basically capture this request and all the fields here. Okay, these are the permitted language codes, and similarly these are the permitted message types. Okay, now that is the main thing, like the first building block we need for this. Okay, the next thing is to actually build a controller layer. Okay, so for that what we'll do is we'll create a package called controllers. Okay, controllers. All right, here we'll create a new controller. We'll call it message controller. You can see that I am naming my controller on the basis of the resource. Message controller means it is only going to deal with message resources. Okay, cool. Now you guys already know that there is something called REST controller, which is going to basically convert this into a REST API based controller. And then you have something called request mapping. Okay, now if you look at these APIs, in all of these APIs, there is one base path, which is messages. Okay, messages, right? So what I'll do here is I will go here and I will add messages. Okay, this messages, when Spring compiles the classes, it will automatically add these things for you. So you don't have to give these things. Okay, you don't have to give the forward slashes. You can just provide the messages, the base path. So request mapping on top of a class will give you the base path. Inside that you can have your different HTTP methods. Okay, I will use something called SLF4J, which is just for logging purpose. Okay, now first API is reading all messages. So let me go ahead and say private, sorry, not private, this will be a public method. Public, it will basically, you want to read all the messages. So it will be a list of all messages. Okay, so it will be list of message DTO. Okay, yeah, so get all messages. Okay, now let's just return null for now. Okay, let's just understand what I've done here. I've created a controller. So what will happen now is every request coming for messages will be mapped to this particular controller here. Okay, then inside that it will look for the specific methods. Okay, this is read all messages. This means that you can, it is a, can you tell me what call there will be, what HTTP method will be to read all the messages?
Post.
Post to read.
Sorry, sir. Get.
Yes. Yes. So you will annotate this with get mapping. Okay, you can see get mapping. Don't confuse it with getter. Getter comes from Lombok. Get mapping. Okay. So message DTO, you can see that there is no getter and setter. So the first thing I'll do is I'll say data. Okay, data, what it does, data does these things. Data does setter, it does getter, it does toString. Okay, So instead of writing these three, I can just simply write data, and it'll give me all the access to all the variables, and it'll give me basically the getters and setters and everything to string. Okay, so back to my controller here. What I'll do for now is I'll just return an empty list. Okay, so I'll say collections empty list. Okay, there is this collection class on which you can call an empty list. It will basically return an empty list. So this is already an API which is going to give me a blank response. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this, or let me just use the inbuilt terminal. Okay, so I'll say mvn spring boot run. This is different from the earlier commands I was using. Okay, so from now on I'll be using this, and I don't want the test cases to be compiled, so I'll say tests. Okay, you can see that it's running on 8080, and just to make sure that our application property, okay, I'm going to change this application properties to refactor to application.yml. Okay, I'll just here server port, I'll call it 3030. Okay, and I'll rerun this application. Okay, I'll open my Postman running on 3030. Joseph localhost 3030, a simple get call here. Okay, acha, it says 404 not found. Why? Because okay, interesting thing. It says 404 not found. You remember the HTTP codes? I told you that if a resource is not going to be found, then it'll send the 404. Where is this message coming from? So what happened here? You basically requested for an API, which is like this. You basically placed a get call on this API. Now, what happens is that Spring comes here and Spring basically checks for this request mapping here. Okay. And it finds this only one class called message controller with the request mapping as messages. Everything else, so basically what the resource you're looking for, which is just the home page or just the root, there is no such mapping for that. Okay, which is why Spring has a default mechanism. Okay, Spring has a default error handling mechanism. In that error handling mechanism, Spring basically creates this error object for you and sends it to you as a response. If you look here, timestamp is basically when the timestamp was created. Status is 404. This basically means that the resource has not been found, error is not found, and path you have requested to is this. Okay, and you can see this thing. So what we'll do is we'll send it to our REST API. Okay, if you now do this, you can see that it gives you a blank list. Okay, and it gives you 200 because we're sending an empty list. Okay, this was the first one. We will go into the implementation part later, but let's just build all these APIs first. The second thing is basically capturing reading a specific message. Okay, before that, we have done a read on all messages. Let's just do a post basically to create a message. Okay, so what we'll do here is we'll say public. Now, what will you send as a response? For now, I'll just return a string. Okay, string as a response. I'll say create message. Okay, acha, any question about this, guys? Anyone? Forget about the implementation part here, but any question about what I just did here? Okay, cool. Next thing we'll do is post mapping. I guess you already know this thing. Post mapping with no path basically means it is going to be a post call on this. Okay, and we will take the message DTO. Okay, as the request. I'll say message DTO. Now here you have to add this request body, this annotation. This request body annotation will what will do is this request body annotation will convert this piece and it'll inject everything in it, okay, inside of this. All right, but okay, let me tell you this thing when it actually occurs. Okay, so this will actually the moment you say request body, it will basically capture this particular part. Okay, so what I'll do is, for now I'll just return done. Okay, I'm just imitating this thing as if it's done. And what I'll do here is I'll just print this thing. I'll say log dot info received creation request, the placeholder, and I'll say message DTO. Okay, done. That was my create message. Then the next API would be to read a specific message ID. So I'll say public. This time I'll return a message DTO itself. So message DTO will be the return type. Get message by ID will be my method name here. Final long ID. Okay. And then this will be a get call, right? It'll be a get call, but can anyone tell me the difference between this and this? What is this called and what is this called? Guys, we've been through this. Any guess? Even if you're wrong, I'll correct you.
Sir, this curly braces takes the input, sir.
It takes an input, but what is it called? What's the name of this? It's some variable. This is also some variable. What is it called?
I forget the name.
This is basically path variable, okay, because it's on the URL path. This is called query parameter because it begins with a query or question mark sign, okay? So this is a path variable, which means in my get map, I'll say, okay, so for this API, if you see, this part is already taken care of by this annotation, okay? The messages part, this here is already taken care of by the class level request mapping, which means the only part left for me is this, okay? So what I'll do is I'll go here, I'll say curly braces ID, okay? So the ID will be injected here. Now here, what you have to do is you'll have to use this path variable annotation, okay? Okay, if you leave it like this, it will work just fine, okay? But say you have a path like this, ID, and then let's say lang code, okay? In a situation like this, your API would look something like this, okay? Now, you will do this. You will say final language code, right? And then you will add it to path variable. The problem with this approach is your Spring doesn't know which one is going to be ID here and which one is going to be lang code here, okay? Because I've written language code here, this is lang hyphen code here, okay? For this to happen, you can directly specify what variable it is. I can come here and say ID. When I say this, this ID is going to map to whatever is the name here. And then if you say this is my language code inside of path variable, you will just say lang code, okay? It will be mapped. Is this understood by everyone? Any questions on this? When you have multiple path variables, this is how you basically map them. Okay, cool. That is done. What we should do is we'll remove this and we'll just select the ID. I'll just print this thing. For now, I'll just print, okay? We'll say received, no, getting message by ID, placeholder ID, okay? And then just return a simple new message DTO, okay? It'll be a blank DTO, basically nothing there. That's there. Then the next thing is, So now let's say you have a requirement where you say that, okay, you say that I want to update the entire thing and I want to update the partial thing. Okay. Uh, so what we have done so far is we have created a get API, which will get all the messages. We have created a post API, which will create a new message. We have created a get API by ID, which will get the particular thing by ID. Now, if we have already created one particular message, and let's say we want to change something, like we want to change the entire thing altogether. Okay. For that, your API would be like this. You would say public, let's just say I'm going to return the updated message Dto. I'll say update okay. Here I'll take let's take a look at this thing. Okay, it will be a put mapping because I said put is going to be for complete update. So I'll say put mapping. Okay, put mapping on what? Put mapping on this path, right? Put mapping on this particular path because I'm doing a complete update on this path. So just like this one here, let me just close this. Just like this one here, I'll have this ID. Okay, that will map it to my ID. Now, put mapping. So in order for me to catch this path variable, I'll say final long ID, and then I'll add this at path variable annotation, and I'll just simply put the ID here. Okay, this is done. Now, this has a request body as well. What is the request body? It is the complete message Dto. So what we'll do is we'll say request body final message Dto, message Dto, and I'll do this print here. Updating message by ID to, okay, two placeholders. So first thing is the ID. So I'll pass the ID here. Second thing is the message Dto. Done. And then I'll just return a blank message ID. Okay. Or I'll just return this entire message Dto, whatever I'm getting. Done. Okay. Don't worry about the implementation. Just worry about these annotations, what I'm putting here. Okay. This is a put mapping. Now, let's say you want partial update as well. Whereas you say that somebody who created a message can change the message body and can change the type of the message, but they are not allowed to change the region or the lang code. Okay, I'll write down the requirement here. Allow update of message and type, but not region or lang code. Okay, how do we do this thing? This is where partial update comes into picture. Okay, it can either be like this, or you can say that you know, if you send one request with just one particular field, only update that. Okay, so for now, let's just go with this. This is our requirement. Allow update of message and type, but not region of lang code. So which basically means that at max, can anyone tell me that if I need to capture just a message and type, what my request body would be? Which fields my request body would contain? Any guess, anyone? It's fine if you're wrong, just say.
Patch, sir.
Huh? Sorry?
Patch.
H. I didn't get
Patch.
it.
Patch.
Yes, sir, patch because
No.
of partial update.
No. I'm not talking about the method. I'm saying, can you tell me how the request body would look? This is the request body for creating a message, right? How would the request body look? What fields would be here? You just want the fields to change of this and this. What would be the fields?
All fields are there, sir.
No, man, not all
Maybe
fields.
all there.
You are allowing updation of just, you are
Message.
allowing, sorry.
Only message and type, sir.
Exactly. Exactly, only message and type, because you are allowing a partial update, right? If you do the same thing here, if you give them all the access to all the fields, then they can simply send values for all of them, right? Then it defeats the purpose of partial update. It becomes a complete update, right? So which means that we are going to do this thing now. Can anyone tell me if I can use this message DTO for capturing the request? A simple yes or no. Think and tell. In order for me to capture just these two fields, can I reuse this? Ankit wants to say something.
Maybe yes, but not
Yes. Technically, you can
because
use this.
because we want all these all these types.
Exactly. So if we reuse this class, the problem is they can then fill up values for this and this, which are the two forbidden fields that we don't want, which is why it's always a good idea that for partial updates, you always create another class. Okay. So what I'll do is I'll come here and I'll say update message DTO. Okay. I'll just create a class like this. Here, what I'm going to do is I'll simply have string message, message type. Okay. Do a data on this. So now if you create a method, your patch method with this field, even if someone tries to send all the fields here, your request will only capture these two fields. Okay. So what I'll do now is I'll go to my controller here and I'll say public. Okay. Now tell me something. I have sent a request to update these two fields only. What should be the return type? Should I return these two fields or should I return the entire updated message after the update? Any guess?
Return all things, sir. Return all things.
Yes, you ideally should return all the things, because even if you're allowing the narrow insertion, narrow update, when you're returning the data, ideally you can basically display all the things. Okay, all the fields. Like you can say that this is how your message look after updation. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll return the message DTO part. Okay, we'll say perform partial update. All right, done. Because this will be a patch update, patch mapping. Okay, here it'll have the same ID. Okay, so I'll say final long ID, and basically I'll just copy paste this path variable. This is where Java becomes extremely verbose, because for every method you have to do this. Okay, and then for request body, I'll just say request body. Okay, here I'll say final update message DTO, update message DTO, and that's it. For now, I'll just okay, updating message by ID to this. Okay, ID is this, update message DTO is this. Okay, and I'm just going to return a simple message DTO here. Okay, I'm not caring about the implementation, I'm just designing the APIs here. This would be a partial update. Then the next thing is yeah, that completes the partial update on this. Delete, you already know. Delete would be very simple. I'll just go ahead and do the delete. Delete can just return a simple string, delete by ID. Okay, here you'll say path variable. Delete also contains path variable, so ID. Okay, you'll say final long ID, and you'll say delete mapping ID. Okay, you can just go ahead and delete this. You can say deleting message by ID, and just return a new, or let's just return successfully deleted, something like that. Okay, done. This is the day. Now let's talk about these APIs. Okay, so I have three things: type, lang code, and basically region. Okay, so let's create APIs for them. These all are get APIs with query parameter. Okay, so the first thing will be it will return a message DTO, or it will return a list of messages, because we're saying get us all the messages of type this. So it will return a list of message DTOs. Okay, get all messages by type. Okay, now here it will be a get mapping. Okay, then the name would be the same, but then here you have something called params. Okay, you have something called params. Okay, in this params, this basically takes in an array of query parameters that you basically pass here. Okay, in this params here you can pass whatever fields you want. For now I just want the field of type, so I'll say type. Okay, and here what I'll say is I'll say query, sorry, not query, it's query parameter in Spring Boot is known as request parameter. Okay, request parameter. In there I'll say map it to type. Okay, so you can see this type actually maps to this type here, and I'll say final type is message type, message type, message type. Okay, getting all messages by type. Okay, oh my god, yeah, message type, and just return an empty list. So I'll just say collections. Remember, I'm not implementing anything as of now. I'm just designing the APIs here. Okay, that's there. And then we have the similar for lang and region. Okay, so I'll say public list. I mean, let me just copy this whole thing rather than typing things out. Okay. What I want to capture is basically lang code. So I'll just say lang code, and I'll say by lang code. Okay, here I'll basically copy the whole thing. Okay, language code is of language code type, so that let's refactor this. Okay, what this does is that whenever a call is coming to this particular API, let's say the call comes to language type as general. Okay, what this will do is it will come to this base path, which is actually sitting at the class level layer, and then it will look for the mapping. You're saying that any call that comes specifically for type, map it to this. Okay, so it will come and it will be injected here. Okay, then you're saying any call that comes with the specifically for language code, you inject it here. All of this works fine. What if when you have something like this? When you have something like this where you say type is general and lang code equals en. When you have more than one query parameter to capture, how do you capture it? The way to do that is, you see this params here, right? Params here basically is an array of things. If you go here, you will see it basically takes an array of strings. Okay, this is where you specify how many ever query parameters you need to capture. So I have one for type, one for lang. Now I want an API which captures both lang and type together. Okay, so what I can do here is With this, I can say type. Okay. When I do this, I will now, if you see here, if you did not use this thing, it would have worked in this case because there was only one query parameter. But now that you have multiple query parameters, you will now have to specifically tell this request param, sorry, is this request? Yeah, request param guy, which parameter you want injected in here. So here I'm saying I want the language code, the value that comes for language code injected inside the language code. Similarly, what I'll do is request param. Okay, I'll say type, okay, final message type, and you'll say getting all messages by type and language code. So you'll just say message type. Okay, this is how you capture more than one parameter. Now, any questions so far? Anything related to whatever we have learned so far? I have not implemented the logic yet. I'll do it tomorrow, but for now, it's important that you understand how I'm designing the APIs here. Okay.
सर लास्ट के API जो बना 3 URL जो बन रहे हैं
हाँ, कौन सा?
लास्ट के जो 3
हाँ,
URL बना रहे हैं
ये वाला
क्या
ना?
सर हम इन तीनों
हाँ, तीनों का, हाँ, ये वाला।
तीनों का सर क्या हम एक API बना सकते हैं
हाँ,
जो वाले तीनों को हैंडल कर सकते हैं?
हाँ, तुमको अगर ये रीजन चाहिए ना इसके साथ, तो तुम यहाँ पे ऐसे कर सकते हो, ऐसे लिख सकते हो कि कहाँ गया, इधर पे तुम एक एडिशनल ऐड कर दोगे रीजन, तो वो यहाँ पे मैप होके आएगा। ठीक है, तो फिर तुमको यहाँ पे कैप्चर करना पड़ेगा। यू वुड हैव टू मेंशन दिस थिंग कि मेरे को एक ऐसा मैसेज, एक रीजन चाहिए जो यहाँ पे होता है, एंड देन दैट्स इट। ठीक है।
नो
हेलो।
नो सर आई एम माय मींस कि एक URL में बनाऊं और तीनों URL को हैंडल कर मींस कि अगर
एक API जो तीनों URL हैंडल करे,
या
तुम मतलब एक ऐसा, मतलब you're saying कि एक ऐसा मेथड बनाओ जो तीनों को हैंडल कर सके,
तीनों मेथड को हैंडल कर।
हाँ, तो वो यहाँ पे हो रहा है ना, ये तुम्हारा तीनों रिक्वेस्ट जब तीनों आता है वो कैप्चर करेगा। बट तुम बोल रहे हो कि ये 3 केसेस हैंडल करेगा, मतलब ये लैंग सिंगल लैंग करेगा, सिंगल टाइप करेगा, एंड जब तीनों के साथ
अगर मान लीजिए कि एक 3 पैरामीटर है हमारे पास है,
हाँ,
तो अगर एक पैरामीटर देते हैं तो एक के लिए चले, अगर 2 पैरामीटर देते हैं तो 2 के लिए चले, अगर तीनों दे तो तीनों के लिए चले।
हाँ, कर सकते हो, उसमें तुम एक्चुअली मैप यूज कर सकते हो, एंड उसमें फिर तुमको प्रॉब्लम वहां पे ऐसा होगा कि तुमको फिर चेक करना पड़ेगा कि मान लो तुम्हारे पास 3 मेथड है, A, B एंड C। ठीक है, अगर तुम्हारे पास बस टाइप का क्वेरी आता है तो तुम A को इन्वोक करोगे, अगर तुम्हारे पास बस लैंग्वेज कोड का आता है तो तुम B को इन्वोक करोगे, अगर तुम्हारे पास तीनों आता है तो तुम C को इन्वोक करोगे। ठीक है, तो फिर तुम एक ही मेथड लिख सकते हो, एंड उस मेथड पे तुमको बेसिकली इफ एल्स लूप लगाना पड़ेगा। इफ एल्स में चेक करना पड़ेगा कि इज इट ओनली टाइप एंड बोथ आर नल, अच्छा ऐसा है तो कॉल A, इज इट लैंग कोड एंड टाइप, if it's so then call B, if it's all 3 of them then call C। ऐसे ना करके this is the best way to do it। आप मतलब we can do it, the answer to your question is can we do it? Yes, we can do it। is it a good practice? No, because you want things to handle, you want single responsibility, एक component को, एक API को बस एक ही responsibility दिया जाएगा, ये API is only meant to handle these 3 params। ठीक है, तो this will handle only these 2, ये API is meant to handle only 1 parameter, so this, okay, समझे?
ओके
ठीक है, तो that design is not good, don't go for that। okay, now the question is, this is a very simple use case, right, where you have just 3 parameters। imagine something like this, you want a weather report, let's actually see, or let's just talk about a movie, okay? A movie can have many information, okay? A movie can have a release year, genre, actors, producers, okay, rating, languages supported in, okay, time, duration. Typically, if you are building a movie database, you would be using at least these, and there's more. Like you can do this, and then you can say, I don't know, is it 3D or not? 3D or not, something like this. These are many of the information that you can have. Okay. If you see here, in a simple resource like movie, if you want to write query parameter API for each of them and all combinations of them, what do I mean by that? I mean, let's say you want something like this: movies release year. Okay. Then let's say you want this. Okay. Let's say then you want both of them. Okay. You say movies release year and genre. Okay. If you compile all of them, okay, if you have one API which will accept all the query parameters, it will look gigantic. It will have this, then you'll say actors, then you'll say producers, then you will say ratings. You can see that the list will go on and on and on. It's going to become a very long URL. And in any browser, I think, let me just check, longest URL length browser supports. Okay. Any maximum URL length is 2083 characters. So now if you have something like this, if you're working in a production, I'm pretty sure you won't have just things starting with movies. You'd have something like this API and da 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 da, and then da 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 da, and then after that you'll have movies, and then you'll have release year and all those things. If you inject all the values right, this will easily cross out your 2083 characters, which means if this is the point where you are exactly 2083 length, this part will be truncated. Okay, because the browser does not support that lengthy URL. Okay, which means it's a problem. So what do you do when you have a resource like this which has something as long as this or something even longer? Let's say you have more of these things. Okay, you obviously cannot construct a URL with this because your browser won't support. What do you do in that case? So there is a different approach. I think that is the agenda of this thing: writing query parameter specific handlers, which is what we have done. Query parameter specific handlers we have written. Now the question is how to handle too many query parameters on a resource. Something like this: when you have too many fields on which you can query, how do you handle that? You cannot write a long query like this. So for this, you have to think a bit differently. Okay, you have to basically see what you're trying to do. If you are trying to anytime you apply query parameter, it's always a read call, right? That means you're searching a resource by something. When I say movies release year, this thing, that means I'm saying that get me all the movies that were released in the year 2000, right? It is essentially just a search. Similarly, if we say get me all the movies that were released in the year 2000 and the genre is horror, okay, that means that give me all the movies that released in 2000 and the genre is horror. Let's say I add one more thing that says where all these actors worked, and this actor would be basically an array of lists. I'll say Will Smith, okay, and then I'll say something else. Let's say you give it's going to become a very big thing. So in order to deal with something like this, we treat this entire request, this entire get API call with query parameters as a search request. This is very important. If you don't understand, let me know and I'll explain again. Whenever you have multiple fields to query on, okay, you don't construct something like this. You create a search request API. Okay, how would it look? It would look something like this. It would look like movies hyphen, I'm sorry, slash search. Okay, this is going to be a search API. And here, instead of doing a get call on this, you're going to basically create a post call where you would say release year 2000, genre horror, okay, actors, okay. Then you would have something like producers. Okay. Okay, never mind. Yeah. Okay. Ratings. Okay. This entire thing that you are doing here, okay, this will be treated as a post request on a search. Why is it a post request? Because we are creating a search request. So the search request is being treated as a resource itself. Okay, this is confusing for many. Let me know and I'll explain again. Who wants me to explain again?
Sir, post requesting. How you
Ankit and Abhishek, you guys have a problem, right? Okay, ठीक है. देखो, when you have movie like, मान लो कि तुम्हारे पास एक ऐसा मूवी डेटाबेस है जहां पे तुम ये सारे इंफॉर्मेशन सेव कर रहे हो, रिलीज ईयर, जॉनरा वगैरह वगैरह, ठीक है. तो अगर तुमको, तुम्हारे पास ऐसा रिक्वायरमेंट आया कि फाइंड ऑल द मूवीज जो एक पर्टिकुलर, मान लो 2000 में रिलीज हुआ, जिसका जॉनरा था हॉरर, जिसमें ये सारे एक्टर्स काम किए हैं, जो 3D प्रिंट में है एंड जिसका ड्यूरेशन 1.5 घंटे का है, ठीक है. तो तुम लोग समझ सकते हो कि अगर मैं यहाँ पे क्वेरी पैरामीटर लगाते जाऊँ ना, तो ये एंड करते करते लंबा लिस्ट हो जाएगा, ठीक है. इसके बाद मैं और लिखूंगा प्रोड्यूसर्स, ठीक है, कुछ कुछ होगा, उसके बाद एंड फिर मैं लिखूंगा रेटिंग्स, ठीक है. तो ये बहुत लंबा हो जाएगा. और इसका प्रॉब्लम ये है कि नॉर्मल ब्राउजर बस 2083 कैरेक्टर सपोर्ट करते हैं, जिसका मतलब कि जिस पॉइंट पे तुम्हारा 2083 कंप्लीट होगा, मान लो यहाँ पे तुम्हारा 2083 कंप्लीट हो रहे, ये छोड़ के बाकी पूरा पार्ट डिलीट हो जाएगा, ब्राउजर ऑटोमेटिकली हटा देगा. इट्स एन, तो क्या होगा, ये पूरा चीज एक इनवैलिड क्वेरी बन जाएगा, ये एक पूरा इनवैलिड यूआरएल बन जाएगा, तुमको 404 दिखाएगा, ठीक है, 404 दिखाएगा. तो अब तुमको रिक्वायरमेंट है कि ये सारे में तुमको करना पड़ेगा, ठीक है, बट तुम्हारा ब्राउजर सपोर्ट नहीं करता है, तो तुम कैसे करोगे इसको? तो तुम इसको एक सर्च रिक्वेस्ट में कन्वर्ट कर दोगे, ठीक है. बेसिकली तुम क्या कर रहे हो, तुम यहाँ पे बोल रहे हो कि मेरे को वो सारे मूवीज ढूंढ के दो जो जिसका ये क्वेरी मैच करता है, ठीक है. तो इट इज एसेंशियली व्हाट, इट्स अ सर्च रिक्वेस्ट, ठीक है. तो तुम क्या करोगे, इंस्टेड ऑफ मूवीज उसके ऊपर एक क्वेरी लगा, मतलब इंस्टेड ऑफ डूइंग दिस, तुम क्या करोगे, उसमें और एक पाथ ऐड करोगे जो कि है सर्च पाथ, ठीक है. उस सर्च पाथ में तुम एक पोस्ट रिक्वेस्ट करोगे. अब क्वेश्चन आ रहा है कि पोस्ट रिक्वेस्ट क्यों कर रहे हैं हम लोग? पोस्ट रिक्वेस्ट इसीलिए कर रहे हैं बिकॉज द थिंकिंग हियर हैज चेंज्ड, कि अगर तुम, मतलब अगर तुम कुछ मूवीज यहाँ से, मतलब इफ यू आर ट्राइंग टू क्वेरी सम मूवीज, देन यू क्रिएट अ सर्च रिक्वेस्ट and that search request will give you a search response, ठीक है. think of it like this, जब तुम ऐसे कुछ बना रहे हो तो तुम्हारा थिंकिंग तुम चेंज कर रहे हो ऐसे बोल के कि मतलब if somebody creates a request here, it will be a search request, it will be a search request on this path and the response will be a search response. So what we do here is, instead of having these queries, we add this search, this thing here, and then we create a post call on this. Post call will usually have all our data, which is basically what we were doing here, okay? This is just a change of approach. Earlier we were saying कि post use करते just to create a new entity, right? ठीक है. यहाँ पे हम लोग बोल रहे हैं कि हम लोग post, इसको हम लोग post बना रहे हैं because we want to create a new search request. जितने बार तुम यहाँ पे इस particular URL पे एक post call दोगे with all these parameters, उतने बार वो एक नया search request create करेगा, एक नया search process trigger करेगा, and एक नया search response तुमको return करेगा. समझ में आया? Understood?
Yes, sir.
ठीक है. इसका एक लाइव एग्जाम्पल तुमको बताता हूँ. तुम अगर गूगल में यहाँ पे आओगे तो गूगल में देखना, यहाँ पे जो क्यू है ना, इस क्यू इक्वल्स टू में वो लोग पूरा ये चीज डाले हैं. ठीक है. इफ यू सी हियर दिस कंप्लीट यूआरएल, दे डोंट हैव लाइक, इन लोगों का बस इतना ही है. ठीक है. तुम्हारा जो इतना लंबा जो मतलब हम लोग यहाँ पे बहुत कुछ सर्च किए, मतलब दिस इटसेल्फ इज द URL thing, and then we can type lots of other stuff and then can search enter. ठीक है. तो बेसिकली क्या होता है कि वो लोग तुम्हारा सारे रिक्वेस्ट को लेता है. ठीक है. ये वाला पार्ट जो तुम दिख रहे हो, दैट इज जस्ट व्हाट्स विजिबल टू यू. बिहाइंड द सीन गूगल क्या करता है, गूगल तुम्हारा लोकेशन ट्रैक करता है, गूगल देखता है कि तुम कौन सा अकाउंट से भेज रहे हो वगैरह वगैरह. ये सारे डिटेल्स इकट्ठे करके वो एक सर्च रिक्वेस्ट भेजता है अपने सर्वर को. ठीक है. तो अगर तुम यहाँ पे देखोगे वो क्या कर रहे हैं बेसिकली, वो यहाँ पे जो क्यू है ना, वो यहाँ पे ये पूरा चीज तुम यहाँ पे मतलब दिस इज द क्वेरी दैट यू आर सेंडिंग एंड देन लॉन्गेस्ट URL दिस ब्राउजर एंड देन आई गेस एट दिस पॉइंट, हाँ ये वाला पार्ट पूरा ट्रंकेट कर दिया. बट दिस इज हाउ योर रिक्वेस्ट क्वेरी वुड लुक. ठीक है. व्हाट इज हैपनिंग बिहाइंड द सीन इज they are capturing all of this information. Okay, imagine this, Google is capturing all of this information, then they are converting it into a encoded string. ठीक है. encoded string में convert कर रहे हैं, इसीलिए तुमको ये वाला part दिख रहा है, ये पूरा ये जो part है ना, this is all encoded part of it, and then they are basically replacing it as queue and then they're triggering that. समझ में आया? इतना लंबा अगर तुमको, if you have a long query like this, either create a post request or do how Google did. ठीक है. What Google did is a bit advanced, so we won't go there, but the point here is, if you have something like this and you're essentially just searching it, create a post request on the search path. So every time you create a post request on the search path, you're essentially creating a new search request which will trigger a new search process, which will then return a new search response. Okay, this much should be clear to everyone. Let me know if you want me to take you through something else. This is our class. We'll actually implement the rest of the things tomorrow because according to today's agenda, this is how much we are supposed to learn. Okay? Any questions, guys, on how to design the APIs? So let's do a recap. We have learned how to define the base path. We have written a get API on all the messages. We've written a post API and we have basically created a DTO. Okay, we understood the difference between a DTO and a model. Okay, DTO is something which is only understood by controller. We look back at this whiteboard. DTOs are something which are only understood by controller. Models are something understood by services. Database layer is something understood by entities. Okay, so right now we're just dealing with controllers. So because controllers is there, I have to capture this. I have to capture this particular request. Where is it? I have to capture this particular request in my Spring Boot. So I create a class for that. I created a class for that. And then basically I created a controller. And yep, I created a post mapping where I captured it with request body. I created a get mapping for a specific message ID that's there. Then I created a put mapping to do a complete update where I'm basically taking the entire message DTO. Then I did a partial update. Okay, so for that I used patch mapping. In the patch mapping, I have basically defined the ID for which you're doing the partial update. And for partial update, I created one more class here, which will only accept the fields which are for which you will allow partial update. Okay, so these two fields, and then this is a delete API. This is a get API for this specific query parameter, which is type. This is a get API for a particular lang code. This is a get API for both of them, like lang code and type. And for the search request that we build, we'll go ahead and implement that method, public list of message DTO. Okay, I'll say get all messages by search request. Okay, now for this search request to work, you can actually go ahead and create a DTO here. Okay, I'll call it movie, sorry, not movie, message search request. Okay, we want search request on what fields? We want search request on all three of them, right? So we'll say private language code, private message type, private string region, and that's it. Okay, there can be a question as to why we didn't use message DTO, because then if somebody sends something like this, what do you do with that? Okay, so you created this guy is meant only to handle creation and read request when you want everything for message. For partial update, you have a message DTO, and for search request, you basically create this thing. Okay, and then what you do is you come here and you say final message search request. This would be a simple at request body, and here you will say a post mapping. Okay, post mapping on what? You already have the path here, which is messages. You will say messages search, which means I have the base path mentioned in the class level. I just have to mention this particular path. So I'll go here and I'll say post mapping at search. Okay, that's it. You can just say received search request and just return an empty list. Okay, collections dot empty list. Done. We'll implement each of these methods in the next session, but this is basically how you define the APIs. Okay, if you have more than one query parameter, this is how you capture them. If you have too many parameters, then you basically create a separate path called search, and then each request you treat as search request, and then you return a search response. Okay, that's all for now. If you have any questions, let me know, or we can end the session. Cool. Thank you for joining. Bye-bye.